Yo, what is good? We have another episode of the Bhagavad Gita, covering the Bhagavad Gita, where we, of course, cover the Bhagavad Gita. This episode is going to be a good one. I was reading it this morning and I was getting hype. I'm like, yo, I can't wait to talk about this. This is really good. So let's get right into it. It starts off with Arjuna, aka the disciple, talking to Krishna, aka God. And he's saying, "Oh God, but what is one impelled to do sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force?" So he's saying, like, what is it when people are impelled to do sinful things, even if they don't want to do it? Because there's people who end up committing certain sins, but they don't want to actually do it. And he's asking why. So a bit more on what he's saying. It says down here, a living entity as part of the Supreme is originally spiritual, pure, and free from all material contaminations. Therefore, by nature, he is not subject to the sins of the material world. But when he is in contact with the material nature, he acts in many sinful ways without hesitation and sometimes even against his will. As such, Arjuna's question to Krishna is very sanguine as to the perverted nature of all living entities. Although the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin, he is still forced to act. Sinful actions are not, however, impelled by the supersoul within, but are due to another cause, as the Lord explains in the next verse. Then the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "It is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all devouring sinful enemy of this world." Now, before I explain that, let me see something real quick. All right, cool. So, let me explain what that means, right? I'm just going to say the whole entire, well, almost the whole entire explanation. It says, when a living entity comes in contact with the material creation, his eternal love for Krishna, aka his eternal love for God, is transformed into lust in association with the mode of passion. Or, in other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust as milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath. Wrath is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity, and it is lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. Wrath is the manifestation of the mode of ignorance. These modes exhibit themselves as wrath and other corollaries. If, therefore, the mode of passion, instead of being degraded into the mode of ignorance, is elevated to the mode of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting, then one can be saved from the degradation of wrath by spiritual attachment. The origin of everything is the Supreme Brahman. Therefore, the origin, aka the Supreme God. Therefore, the origin of lust is also in the Supreme. If therefore lust is transformed into love for the Supreme, or transformed into Krishna consciousness, or in other words, desiring everything for Krishna and God, then both lust and wrath can be spiritualized. So now let me say a couple of things about that real quick. So you have seven deadly sins, right? You know what I'm saying? You have the seven deadly guys. You see, you have lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, pride. So inside this verse is saying that everything comes from lust, which I can actually see. Now, lust could be seen as the original one, and also me and my boy Cash were diving into monsters, right? And how monsters are beings that live by the seven deadly sins, and how pride was seen as like one of like the most deadliest ones. Like when you like have pride, it's like one of the worst things ever. And here's the reason why. Pride actually comes from lust in the sense of this. Lust is like the desire is like this desire really attached emotion to like physical things, right? You know what I'm saying? That also generates greed because when you have lust, you want to obtain more and more things, which is greed. Gluttony is like the overeating of food and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? When you lust for food, you obtain gluttony. Wrath, like they said inside the John, when you don't get what you lust after, you get wrathful and angry. Jealousy and envy. When somebody has what you are lusting after, you feel envious. Now, when it comes to sloth, right? Sloth technically is not a part of the mode of passion, but even here's how it could be seen as coming from lust. When it comes to lust, right? When you feel like you can't obtain what you lust after, you become dispassionate. You know what I'm saying? Like at first you'll get angry, but then at some point, if you have no more energy left, you're kind of just like, oh, life is meaningless because you can't get what you lust after. You know what I'm saying? But if you actually were in line with source type shit, you wouldn't be lusting after things, and instead you would have a true love for source, which would make you want to act naturally anyway out of this high vibrational feeling. Now, when it comes to pride, right? Pride is like when you're like, oh yeah, I'm so great, haha, I'm the best, and you tend to feel like that after you achieved what you lusted after. So not only are you lusting after something which you shouldn't be lusting after, you actually obtained the lustful thing, and now you have pride, which is why sin is one of like the worst, deadliest sins because not only did you lust, you actually got the lust. You know what I'm saying? Not only did you think about killing somebody, you actually killed that person. It's kind of like that. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. That was really interesting, you know. I mean, it's going to talk a little bit more about these types of things, right? So it says, as fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. So there are 3 degrees of covering of the living entity by which his pure consciousness is obscured. This covering is but lust under different manifestations, like smoke in the fire, dust on the mirror, and womb about the embryo. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living spark can be a little bit perceived. In other words, when the living entity exhibits his God consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fire, but that's covered by the smoke of lust. Although fire is necessary where there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early stage. This stage is like the beginning of God consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to the cleansing process of the mirror. Let me say that differently. The dust on the mirror refers to the cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. The best method to cleanse this mirror of the mind is chanting the holy names of the Lord. And so you know how we're doing that guided manifestation ritual inside the Patreon, right? Yesterday, well, if you're seeing this on YouTube, it was like weeks ago. But for Patreon people, yesterday I made a video as well as dropped a document for like different mantras you could say that help you work with different deities to help you actually evolve during the time skip and evolve overall inside your life. So chanting those mantras actually helps to purify your mind a lot. And they said right here that that's actually one of the best methods to clear the mind is mantras. And the reason why they say that is because when you say a mantra, you put vibrations inside your mind that reverberate over and over again. Most people live their life constantly with like songs inside their head. Like they'll have thoughts, but like most of the time there's like a certain song inside their head. Instead, put a mantra inside that joint. You may not always hear the mantra inside your head, but you have the vibrations of the mantra going off inside your head at all times type shit, purifying your mind. Shabam, shabab, shabami. So with that being said, yeah. Then it says, the embryo covered by the womb is an analogy illustrating a helpless position for the child in the womb who is so helpless that he cannot even move. So when you're being controlled by love, when you're being controlled by lust, you're like a helpless child who can't even move essentially. This stage of living can be compared to that of trees. The trees are also living entities, but they have been put in such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of consciousness, that was interesting. I'm like, damn, they're calling trees lustful, and that's why they're like that. And you can actually, and here's why it's like that. The consciousness, right, that's behind the tree has a very strong desire to be physical, which is why it becomes that physical being a tree. And then a rock is even more physical. You see what I'm saying? So that's why it is exhibiting lust. But like when it said it like that, like, cause like I didn't always think about it like that, but I understand it when they did say it like that. I'm like, yo, that actually is true. That consciousness is technically lustful. It's desiring heavily to be inside the physical so much that it literally becomes a tree. You know what I'm saying? Then it says, the covered mirror is compared to the human being. Wait, my fault. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and beasts, and the smoke covered fire is compared to the human being. In the form of a human being, the living entity may revive a little bit of God consciousness, and if he makes further development, the fire of spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. Be careful, be careful handling of the smoke in the fire. The fire can be made to blaze. Therefore, the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy, which is lust, by the cultivation of God consciousness under able guidance, or under the guidance of somebody who's truly able to guide that person. Which could be your higher self too. It don't gotta always be your person, you know what I'm saying? But then it says, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. It is said inside of a certain spiritual text called the Manu Samriti that lust cannot be satisfied by any amount of sense enjoyment, just as fire is never extinguished by the constant supply of fuel. And by the way, this doesn't always mean like intercourse, you know what I'm saying? Because like you could like lust for something that's like not sex. You could lust for like you really want a certain kind of object, you know what I'm saying? But right now it's about to talk about doing intercourse, right? You know what I'm saying? And it's talking about intercourse because the act of intercourse is an act of unification with something, right? So when you desire something fully, right? It's like you want to unify with that thing. So when you desire food, you need to really, really, really eat it, then unify with it. When you desire a certain object, you really, really need to have that object. When you desire a certain goal, you really have to achieve that goal. You see what I'm saying? So when it speaks about lust and intercourse, it kind of means it in the sense of that. Now let's get into it. So, in the material world, the center of all activities is intercourse. And thus, this material world is called the shackles of. It says sex, but I'm not trying. I don't want to say that too much for the YouTube stuff, and then some BS happen. So it's called the shackles of S life. You know what I'm saying? That's what the material world gets called. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're bounded by trying to unify with everything because you have a real desire to unify with source, but it's being misunderstood as wanting to unify with things inside the material world. You see what I'm saying? And I talked about that actually when it came to divine love versus secular love. I already talked about this, but you know what I'm saying? It's being reflected right here. So yeah, it's not just me saying it. This is a highly spiritual concept. I don't be pulling this stuff up my behind. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, yeah. In the ordinary prison house, criminals are kept within bars. Similarly, the criminals who are disobedient to the laws of the Lord are shackled by S life. Advancement of material civilization on the basis of sense gratification means increasing the duration of the material existence of a living entity. Therefore, this lust is the symbol of ignorance by which the living entity is kept inside the material world. While one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but actually, that so called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer. So, right here it's saying that your desire to enjoy the senses is why you stay inside the material realm for so long. You know what I'm saying? Like if you didn't have material desire, you would transcend this joint. You know what I'm saying? So it's saying that people stay here because they have material desire type stuff, and that good feeling that they think is happiness is actually what's keeping them bound to the material world. You see what I'm saying? So right here it says the senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So what that means, right? It says down here, The enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of the conditioned soul, and therefore, Lord Krishna is giving hints of those places so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he could find them. Mind is the center of all activities of the senses, and thus, when we hear about the sense objects of the mind, Thus, when we hear about the sense objects, the mind gradually becomes a reservoir for all the ideas of sense gratification. And, as a result, the mind and the senses become repositories of lust or physical desire. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next door neighbor of the spirit soul. Lusty, this is funny. Lusty intelligence, that's a funny way of saying it. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter and thus with the mind and the senses. The the spirit soul, and I'm gonna explain more about what this means too. Then there's one more verse after this, then we done with the video. But the spirit soul intelligence, my fault. The spirit soul intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul proper, or the perfected version of the soul. If therefore the soul is directly engaged with the supreme, naturally all other subordinates, namely the intelligence, mind, and senses, will automatically be engaged. In a different spiritual text called the Katha Upanishad, there is a similar passage in which it is said that the objects of sense gratification are superior to the senses, and mind is superior to the sense objects. If therefore the mind is directly engaged in the service of the Lord constantly, then there is no chance that the senses will become engaged in other ways. This mental attitude has already been explained. If the mind is engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is no chance of it being engaged in the lower propensities. In the Katha Upanishad, the soul has been described as Mahan, or the Great. Therefore, the soul is above all, namely the sense objects, the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. With intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. That will solve the whole problem. A neophyte spiritualist, a beginning spiritualist, is generally advised to keep aloof or to keep away from the objects of the senses. But aside from that, one has to strengthen the mind by by the use of intelligence. If by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness by complete surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger. And even though the senses are very strong, like serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. And even though the soul is the master of intelligence and mind, and the senses also, still, unless it is strengthened by association with God inside God consciousness, there is every chance of failing, or there's every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. So a little bit more about that, right? It said that the senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of the lust. Here's what that means, right? Your senses, right, allow you to feel things inside the material world. So you having senses, you have these feelings, right? Makes you susceptible to lust. It makes you susceptible to wanting to have these senses gratified by material nature, right? The mind, right? The mind is a group of information, right? So when you commit lustful acts, your mind holds on to that lustful act. So if you have a certain lustful habit, right? Whenever you do it, it gets built inside your mind more and more in order for your mind to just bring it up again. And then the intelligence, right, is your ability to know things and act. So your ability to know things inside the physical world and your ability to act inside the physical world opens you up to being able to experience lust. Because if you had no intelligence, right, if you weren't able to know certain things about physical reality, right, you wouldn't even be able to like being able to feel stuff comes from intelligence because your senses are giving you certain knowledge based upon feeling. You know what I'm saying? So your ability to know things, right? Your ability to literally know what's going on, even if it's not fully conscious, you just sensing shit, right? Your ability to know certain things, even on an instinctual level, is what gives you the ability to have lust. You know what I'm saying? So it's saying right here that when you turn that intelligence, right, your ability to know things, right, when you turn that towards the soul, everything else falls in line. Your mind will fall in line, your senses fall in line. Why is that? Because you can use your intelligence to know all about the physical world, right? And then have physical stuff inside of your mind, and then have your senses react to physical things. Or you could have your intelligence, right? You could have your ability to know things, right? You could have that turned towards the soul. When your intelligence, when your ability to know things is turned towards the soul, you know things of the soul and you know things of a godly nature. Therefore, your mind will only hold godly ideas and godly concepts, and you will only experience godly feelings and sensations. Therefore, you're going to transcend that lust by understanding your soul. That's what it's talking about right there. You see what I'm saying? So the last thing, right? It says, thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, O disciple, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence and God consciousness, and thus, by spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. In the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, my fault. This third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is conclusively directive to Krishna consciousness or God consciousness by knowing oneself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, without considering impersonal voidness the ultimate end. So, because like most people think that God consciousness means that becoming completely detached inside the void is the ultimate goal, but it's saying no. Inside this chapter is talking about how you're supposed to know God and then bring that godly knowledge actually inside the world. You don't become OD like you'll become detached you'll become detached in the sense that you're not gonna identify as like, oh, I'm the body, but you're still gonna act through the body. You know what I'm saying? You're not gonna just become completely void. You know what I'm saying? In the material existence of life, one is certainly influenced by the propensities for lust and desire for dominating the resources of material nature. Desire for overlording and for sense gratification is the greatest enemy of the conditioned soul. But by the strength of God consciousness, one can control the material senses, the mind, and the intelligence. One may not give up work and prescribed duties all of a sudden, and wait, yeah, my fault. I skipped the whole line. One may not give up work and prescribed duties all of a sudden, but by gradually developing Krishna consciousness, one can be situated in a transcendental position without being influenced by the material senses and the mind, by steady intelligence directed towards one pure identity. This is the sum total of this chapter. In the immature stage of material existence, philosophical speculations and artificial attempts to control the senses by the so-called practice of yogic postures can never help a man toward spiritual life. He must be trained in crystal consciousness and by higher intelligence. And when it said you must know yourself beyond the senses, mind, and intelligence, that is because, right, your intelligence, right, your ability to know things, right, when you act out intelligence is very intellectual, right? It's very logic based, right? So even beyond all logic, right, you must also understand who you truly are. So beyond the information inside your mind, beyond what you feel, and beyond any thought you could possibly think, you must understand who you truly are. That is how you actually transcend lust and you bring that soul nature down to flood your intelligence, to flood your thoughts, to flood the information inside your mind, and to flood your senses and your emotional states. So that's it for this video of the Gita. Hope you enjoyed it. Patreon got this shit like 2 weeks before y'all, so you know it'd be early on Patreon and stuff like that, cause you know it's lit over here. You know how we get. But I love you all. I'm gonna catch you on my next video. All my links down below. Peace.